Hello, welcome to Kingdom Portions. I'm Sean Griffin.
I'm Lindsay Griffin. Shabbat Shalom, guys.
Shabbat Shalom, sweetie.
Shabbat Shalom, babe.
So we are here for our week 3, and we're going to be we're continuing our study in the Deuteronomy portion. And as the purpose of this show, we're going to be connecting that portion with things that we see in the prophets, also the New Testament called the Brit, as well as an extra biblical book. Things pertaining to the gospel of the kingdom of God, because that is, this is kingdom in context. So we, it's kind of the focus of this channel is that we understand that Yeshua, when he was walking around his earthly ministry, that he was constantly teaching and preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, and just like all the prophets were, they all, it was their central message. So this is it's layered everywhere in the Word, and we're excited to dive into it and show it to folks. So, all right, we're going to start out with chapter, is it chapter 7 this week?
Chapter 7, starting in verse 12, if I remember correctly. Yes.
Okay.
And we are just sticking with just the traditional portion schedule. I think that the Jews also keep, if you Google Torah portions, these are the portions that'll pop up, and I have a Tree of Life version of the scriptures in it. Actually, in that Bible, it lays out each portion for us. So we just kind of decided to stick with what other people might already be reading for the week. So that's, in case anyone's wondering why we're just randomly starting in Deuteronomy, it's because we're trying not to add too much for people to read. If you're already reading a portion throughout the week, that might actually kind of be enough. So we just kind of want to stick in the same cycle that other people might be in, and then we're just obviously putting our own spin on things. So.
Yep. All right, so this is in Deuteronomy 7. We're going to start in verse 12. And who wants to go first?
You've got it in your hands.
Okay. Well, let me make sure there's no difficult words in here first. Okay, I'll read this for you.
Okay.
All right, so verse 12, it starts off saying, "If you listen to and are careful to keep these ordinances, the Lord your God will keep his covenant loyalty with you as he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will bless your descendants and the produce of your soil, your grain, new wine, and oil, the young of your herds, the newborn of your flocks, in the land he swore to your fathers that he would give you. You will be blessed above all peoples. There will be no infertile male or female among you or your livestock. The Lord will remove all sickness from you. He will not put on you all the terrible diseases of Egypt that you know about, but he will inflict them on all who hate you. You must destroy all the peoples the Lord your God is delivering over to you, and not look on them with pity. Do not worship their false gods, for that will be a snare to you. If you say to yourself, 'These nations are greater than I, how can I drive them out?' Do not be afraid of them. Be sure to remember that the Lord your God did to Pharaoh be sure to remember what the Lord your God did to Pharaoh and all Egypt, the great trials that you saw, the signs and wonders, the strong hand and outstretched arm, by which the Lord your God brought you out. The Lord your God will do the same to all the peoples you fear. The Lord your God will send the hornet against them until all the survivors and those hiding from you perish. Don't be terrified of them, for the Lord your God, a great and awesome God, is among you. The Lord your God will drive out these nations before you little by little. You will not be able to destroy them all at once. Otherwise, the wild animals will become too numerous for you. The Lord your God will give them over to you and throw them into great confusion until they are destroyed. He will hand their kings over to you, and you will wipe out their names under heaven. No one will be able to stand against you. You will annihilate them. You must burn up the carved images of their gods. Don't covet the silver and gold on the images and take it for yourself, or else you will be ensnared by it, for it is abhorrent to the Lord your God. You must not bring any abhorrent thing into your house, or you will be set apart for destruction like it. You are to utterly detest and abhor it, because it is set apart for destruction." And then chapter 8 starts. Probably a good place to stop. And I think there's some pretty interesting things in this little short moment here at the end of chapter 7. Just from a writing standpoint, I think it's interesting how many times that Yahweh's repeating himself saying, "The Lord your God, the Lord your God, the Lord your God." Like almost in every single new statement, he reminds them. It's almost like he's trying to get them to get the message that he's their God, right? And so I think it's fascinating that he's telling them, don't be afraid. We know that there's these cities that you're going into. People are bigger than you. The cities are established. They've got their own militaries. but God's saying, I'm going to take them out. This is what we saw, also promised back in Exodus 23, where he was saying, I'm going to go ahead of you. And in the midst of that, he talked about how he's going to use the hornets to drive out the inhabitants of the land ahead of them. What I thought was interesting in this when he's mentioning the hornets, I think it's in verse 20, chapter 7, verse 20, it says, the Lord your God will also send the hornet against them until all the survivors and those hiding from you perish. So it's almost like they go into a city, they take it out, people scatter and they're on the run, or they're still in the land area, but they're hiding from them.
Right.
And they haven't fully finished, all the inhabitants of that city, if that city was devoted for complete destruction.
Yeah.
But he's going to send the hornets,
Yeah.
which I think is interesting.
Imagine that scene.
Yeah, remember in I think it's the Joshua chapter 10, the 5 Amorite kings, they're on the run because the Israelites defeat them. Well, actually, it says that God sent the hailstones during that battle that day, and the hail killed more people than the actual Israelites did. So, that's pretty wild. But the 5 Amorite kings are on the run. They go in that cave. They learn that they're in that cave, and they go. But the hornets don't send those guys out. They don't find those guys, if you will, or make them come out of the cave. They just the Israelites do. But I think that's interesting because we do see that people are hiding from them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And supposedly these are kings, 5 of them, of this what we would call this this Amorite region, and they're kingly provincial kings, if you would. And I wonder if this is the same alliance of people groups that became the Philistine nation later, because that was an amalgamation of 5 kingdoms. And so I wonder if that was the predecessor to the Philistine empire, was this Amorite empire, that they're all these cities and all these kings that they're rooting out of this area.
I mean, that sure would explain why the Philistines seem to have some serious problems with the Israelites, why they didn't really like them very much.
Yeah. People, there was technically there was no land of Philistia. Right. There was an area that was ruled by the Philistine empire, but it was multiple kings from that area, right? So it wasn't like a it's very interesting. A lot of people don't realize it was a collection of kings that made up an empire. So, and we see that all throughout history. Nations come together for alliances.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's one called the United Nations. Anyway, we see that often. So, of course, chapter 8. Chapter 7 is interesting because we also see this same warning that we get at Jericho. I remember at Jericho, the guy took some of the silver. I think it was silver he took from the city. The walls had all fallen from the earthquake, and they were going in to plunder the city. And he took some of the silver out. And a lot of people would think, well, why did he do that? We get a little bit of context here because many times their idols were plated in silver and gold.
Right.
So those idols, he could have taken silver directly from. I think I have to go back look in that passage. He may have actually taken an idol, but I'm pretty sure it was silver. But the point was, just like this says here, do not bring it into your house. This guy brings it into his house or his tent, and he tries to hide it, and then they figure out something's wrong in the campment. They got to go find him, right? And then he's killed for this action just because they were already instructed in Deuteronomy 7, do not do that because you will be set apart for destruction, just like the silver is, or the gold is that was associated with these idols. So it seems to be a very strong connection that the Father took really seriously for having, the things associated with idolatry, not even just the idols themselves, but just the decoration pieces that were even associated with it. You didn't want anything to do with it. They were just supposed to burn them all and get rid of them.
I think in our little corner of the world, I think we all know this phrase, pagan police. But for me, that is a level of fear that I sort of understand as I read through the Torah and I see how serious the Father is about destroying idols and destroying things that are tools of the occult and things like that. I think that people can go kind of to the extreme with it and get a little too worried about it, but as someone who was a New Ager pretty much my whole life, I actually every year now for unleavened bread, when I'm getting the leaven out of my house, I include all my other belongings, I go through and I look for anything from my former life as a New Ager, any books, I got rid of my Buddha statues long ago, but I often, go through those things and, occasionally find something that I probably, missed last time I was throwing things away. And I think that, we can apply something like this into our own, walk. We don't necessarily have to, walk into a Catholic church and bash their statues or anything, but we can kind of own that in our own lives.
We may want to.
We may want to, and that might be justified. Justified to to have that urge. But as far as applying things in the Torah to our lives, that is something that I read. Every time I was doing the Torah portions, I'd be reading about destroying the idols and the tools of the occult, and it really hit home for me because I think this year was probably the first year I didn't find anything I needed to throw away that was from some sort of, witchcraft I was involved in my former life.
What's funny, because you're mentioning that Feast of Unleavened Bread and that practice of getting anything, that sin is associated with leaven. Most people understand this idea. And as you go through the house and you're looking for anything that you may think that was associated with formal sinfulness of any kind, you're trying to get it out of the house, to therefore get all the leaven out of your house. I think that's hilarious because I think Oprah just stole it from the Bible, right? Because she's famous for telling people that if you you haven't worn it in a year, or if you haven't used it in a year, throw it away.
Oh.
And don't collect it in your house.
You knew Oprah's
I don't know Oprah.
styles of teaching and stuff.
I just hear things and I remember things. So I heard an Oprah show one day. No, I don't watch Oprah. I heard an Oprah show one day where she was talking about that. And that if that's how she was suggesting her spring cleaning.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Right. Which that could be where we get that idea too, right?
That could be where spring cleaning comes from.
Feast of Unleavened Bread is in the spring, so or at least in our hemisphere. So anyway, I think that's in our part of the land. This Feast of Unleavened Bread is in the spring, so maybe that's where that came from. I don't know, but and how interesting is this? That he's using these hornets to drive out all the sinfulness out of the land, right? To thoroughly purge it out of the land. He's actually using the hornets in addition to the military of Israel and all the people, but he uses the hornets first, and I think that's really fascinating.
It's a creative way to go about it, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's like his version of spring cleaning.
Yeah, if anyone's ever wondering what purpose hornets or wasps could ever serve, well, they could be very important at times.
It's pretty amazing, and we actually looked up hornets one time. Remember?
Yeah.
And it was talking about how some of them have really deadly stings.
Right.
They're even filled with a form of acid, and then other ones they'll send out pheromones so the other boys know where they are.
Right.
And they'll all come get you. And so the hornets.
They're not friendly.
Yeah, and they actually nest in the ground. So if anyone studied the Nephilim, heavily associated with the Nephilim is this idea that they were digging. They always dug. So they were, with their famous Masonic architecture. I say Masonic, but the Nephilim were around far longer than Hiram Abiff. But what I mean is this practice, this architectural knowledge and practice of being able to not only create large objects, megalithic structures, but they'd also do them underground.
Right.
And there's a famous city in Turkey that was built out, and people think it's Nephilim because it could have housed like 40,000 people. It's all built underground with complex caves without huge support beams, and it's a marvel of engineering. And so the idea was, if they're doing these practices in the land, well, hornets nest in the ground.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that God is taking credit for a natural occurrence, that the Nephilim were just digging and stumbled upon some hornets' nests. I'm just saying that it seems to be a very unique concept where the hornets themselves, that's kind of their territory, so to speak. And then these Nephilim, were kind of not only do they like build megalithic structures, but also they would try to build stuff underground as well. And there's all sorts of various reasons for that, both militarily and practically, for storage, for different things. In New England, they found Nephilim structures from Jim Vieira. He's an England historian, and they talked about how they were initially thought just to be cellars, but they realized the stones that were making up these cellars, no regular human could lift them. So they're all across New England and the Northeast, and they're all also down into Ohio. So it's very interesting. That's a little sub research. But So I think it's interesting in chapter 7 that we've got Yahweh. He's using some unique means to drive out the Nephilim and all these clans, just to kind of soften it up, right? Soften up the Israelites come in, they're going to clean up later, and then while doing that, he's saying when you encounter these people, don't take anything from them. We don't want any. Reminds me of Abraham back when he deals with the king of Sodom, and he helps the king of Sodom. He doesn't help him greatly, but he goes and takes out Chedorlaomer, right, and gets Lot back, and then the king of Sodom is grateful. He's still alive from that battle, and he's grateful, and he wants to give Abraham gifts, and Abraham's like, no, I'm not taking anything from you.
Yeah.
So this could be the same concept here, right? Because why? Abraham followed Torah, right?
Yeah.
So he knew the instructions of God. So I just think that that's not a coincidence, in my opinion. Do you want to pick up the next reading?
Yes.
In chapter 8?
Yes.
Okay.
And I am going to read from Sean's Bible just for the sake of continuity, because we've realized it's kind of weird with a bunch of different translations all in one video. So, okay. So, chapter 8. You must carefully follow every command I am giving you today, so that you may live and increase, and may enter and take possession of the land the Lord swore to your fathers. Remember that the Lord your God led you on the entire journey those 40 years in the wilderness, so that he might humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you by letting you go hungry, and he gave you manna to eat, which you and your fathers had not known, so that you might learn that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out, and your feet did not swell these 40 years. Keep in mind that the Lord your God has been disciplining you just as a man disciplines his son. So keep the commands of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams of water, springs and deep water sources, flowing in both valleys and hills, a land of wheat, barley, vines, figs, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without shortage, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron and from whose hills you will mine copper. When you eat and are full, you will praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Be careful that you don't forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his command, the ordinances and statutes I am giving you today. When you eat and are full, and build beautiful houses to live in, and your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold multiply, and everything else you have increases, be careful that your heart doesn't become proud, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its poisonous snakes and scorpions, a thirsty land where there was no water. He brought you water out of the flint-like rock for you. He fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers had not known, in order to humble and test you, so that in the end he might cause you to prosper. You may say to yourself, my power and my own ability have gained this wealth for me. But remember that the Lord your God gives you the power to gain wealth, in order to confirm his covenant he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. If you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods to worship and bow down to them, I testify against you today that you will perish. Like the nations the Lord is about to destroy before you, you will perish if you do not obey the Lord your God.
I like it.
That's pretty intense.
It's pretty intense.
He sounds like he means business.
It's a unique phrase when he says, I testify against you today. Because they're not in court. That's a unique word, right? They're not in court. They haven't done anything wrong yet, but he's saying, I don't know if it's just the translation we're using, but I testify against you today. He's just saying right up front, I mean, because he's always watching, right? He's always going to see nothing's hidden from the sight of the Lord. So I guess he can say that in advance. I'm testifying against you. If you mess up, you will be, dealt with.
Yeah, often the courtroom setting is something that pops into my head when I'm reading. And yeah, I mean, he's saying he will testify against them that day. He's also calling heaven and earth as witnesses throughout the whole Torah. Yeah. It's a very interesting concept,
Interesting way of using that verbiage.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's unique in that passage, he's talking about how he equates this idea of fearing him is keeping his commandments.
Exactly.
And that's something he kind of really drives home, in my opinion, in this chapter. Because to forget him is also, he equates to not keep his commandments.
Yeah.
Is that you've forgotten him. But to fear him is to keep his commandments. So, and this reminds me, the proverb, chapter 1, where it talks about the beginning of wisdom is to fear the Lord.
Right.
And then previously we read in Deuteronomy 4 where it talked about how these instructions, that these commandments you're being given, these will be wisdom for you if you do
Right.
them. You know, and other people will see you and call you wise and wonder where you got this amazing instruction.
Right.
Because that's the idea. He's equating obedience to his commandments to actually respecting and fearing him, and then he was equating this idea that, you know, that is wisdom if you do that, right? But then if you go against these commandments and you stop doing them, then you've forgotten him,
Right.
right? Nobody likes to be forgotten. So it's you're
Especially not the creator of all things.
right. We're dealing with someone that doesn't like to be forgotten, right? Nor does he deserve to be forgotten. Is the
Right.
bigger issue because of everything he does and the amazing love he shows.
Well, and if you're
Which
keeping the commandment to love him with all your heart, then you won't be forgetting him because he'll be the first thing on your heart and on your mind every day.
That's right.
So I think, you know, it's unfortunate that, you know, the mainstream Christianity, the churches, they very rarely go back into the Old Testament. And the reason that's unfortunate is because that's where all of these terms are defined. If you want to know what it means to fear the Lord, if you want to know what it means to forget him, if you want to know what it means to love him and obey him, it's all, I mean, this is our dictionary back here. We don't need Webster's. We just need the Torah, really. So there's a lot of people who walk around using these phrases but couldn't tell you the biblical definition of those phrases. They could probably tell you what Webster's or gotquestions.org says, but they couldn't actually tell you what God says it means to do these things. And that's also what's nice about doing the Torah portions is you get a regular reminder every week of, you know, how the Father defines these terms. And that's all that matters is how he defines things. It really doesn't matter how we define them.
Well, I mean, he's the one introducing the rules,
Right.
The boundaries. So it'd be important to use his definitions for everything.
Yeah.
Because
It'd be wise.
That's right. That's right. It's his reality of where he is in his house in the kingdom, and he's giving these, you know, down. You know, this is what James chapter 3 says: wisdom that came down from above. Right. So he's giving wisdom of how he behaves in his house, which is in, you know, what we call righteousness. Right. This is good behavior that's productive for everything involved. Behavior that fits the creation and the created. Right. So this is the kind of behavior he's giving to the Israelites, and he's trying to, because they were, you know, had adopted some bad behavior in Egypt, and so he's having to wean that out of them through various different processes, but also through constant reminder in the book of Deuteronomy, constantly, over and over again, he's saying to them, look, guys, do these, my commandments are good for you, do them, they're close to you, they're not too far away, it's not impossible, do them. He's just saying it over and over and over, and so I think it's, you know, it's really good for us to do. So anything else you want to talk about in chapter 8?
No, just that's another word that's defined for us in the Torah is righteousness.
That's true, yeah.
So
is it Deuteronomy 6:25, I think?
I think so,
It talks about, you know, if you do these commandments, it will be righteousness for you.
It will be righteousness for us. I mean, it doesn't get much clearer than that, so. Yeah,
and I actually did last week, in our other series on the channel, I did a Morning Cup of Context video where I actually talked about in the book of Romans, where we have in chapter 10 the idea of, you know, in the first 10 verses of chapter 10 of Romans, Paul's expressing the two different types of righteousness that we can have. You know, the righteousness that comes from doing the deeds of the law, and then the righteousness that we get at the resurrection, right? So this righteousness that we're talking about here is our practice, right? This is why there's a priesthood for atonement when we mess up. Right? So this is why this righteousness was given to mankind, so that we can practice the deeds of the law, because we're practicing for the big event, right? For the actual kingdom come. So when we do these things eternally. And this is what Paul's expressing, that you know, once we do these things, it will be righteousness for us and we'll look like Christ, right? Because Christ did them perfectly. So, but at the resurrection, we get a heart circumcised by God, which is what Deuteronomy 30 promises. Yahweh promises to us, Deuteronomy 30 and Jeremiah 31. And this is no longer, we don't have to practice anymore. We'll always do it right. And that's juxtaposing the two different types of righteousness. It's still the same behavior.
Yeah, it'll just be our perfect nature. It'll just be
it's still
literally
the same
in us
instructions.
to only walk that way.
We just won't mess up at that point, because we'll have a heart circumcised by God and a brand new body. So
and that's when we're clothed in righteousness. I mean, we all are familiar with the modern teaching that the moment you believe in Jesus, you magically have his righteousness imputed to you, and that means you don't have to actually follow any of the commandments, or not all of them. we're all familiar with that teaching. So when you really start to understand the resurrection, guys, that's when a lot of these phrases are going to really start to click and make sense for you, and you're going to have a lot easier of a time actually explaining these things to people still in the churches as well as unbelievers. So
because the unbeliever, it doesn't make logical or contextual sense to them.
No, it doesn't.
And I know many times we just hear the idea, well, they don't have the Spirit, so when they read the Bible, they can't get it. There may be some of that involved. I don't knock that idea fully, but I do say that there's a lot of atheists out there with a lot of good questions that are questions that they should rightly be asking because the church has not been answering them contextually or according to the definitions given to us in Scripture. And the church has been imposing their opinion for many, many, many generations. It's called eisegesis. They're imposing their opinion onto the text to come up with an answer that's suitable, but it doesn't match. So the atheist who's not trained in churchianity or in the ways of being in a church service or hearing all these what we would call churchanese. I mean, we're just being kind of tongue-in-cheek about it, but that they're not familiar with that lingo, and they're not sold in on the idea yet, right? Because their heart hasn't been softened by the Father. They're just looking at it logically and contextually, and it's not making sense to them, right? Until we define these terms through what God's definitions He gave us, and we keep them in the context of how they're used, suddenly you can have a conversation with an atheist or an unbeliever or a Buddhist or someone in Hindu or a Muslim
Jew.
or a Jew, someone in Judaism. I've done all these things, guys. I've spoken with Arabs that are practicing Islam, Muslim. I've spoken with people that were Jews from practicing Judaism. I've been able to walk them through the gospel of the kingdom of God in a short conversation with Scripture, and they didn't have any rebuttals or anger. It made sense to them. So now, they may not fully believe all the things yet, but at least they have a story to consider that makes sense, right? So people read all types of fantasy books, okay? And they read the book from start to finish, and so the author gives you the definitions of where the place is, who the characters are, what kind of terms they're using as they interact in their environment in the book. And this is a fantasy book, right? So none of it in there is actually real, but the unbeliever will read that book and we'll go, that was an amazing story that made sense, and that author is good. And if we can't get that kind of response from unbelievers when we explain the gospel of the kingdom to them, including Yeshua's life, death, and resurrection and glorification next to the Father as our high priest, it won't make sense to them, and then we're not communicating the gospel of the kingdom or the life, death, and resurrection of Yeshua, and we're not doing it properly because it's not a story that makes sense to them on any level. So in my life, as the Father led me to understanding the gospel of the kingdom is all throughout the book, I've been able to then communicate this to people in life, and it's such an easy conversation. Because to them, they still may think it's fiction. They still may think you're just telling about a wonderful fictional book, but at least the details make sense to them, and they remember it, and they can chew on it, and it affects them over time. So it's very, very helpful in my opinion. So that's why I have such a passion for it. I've seen it in real life, in action. So, do you have anything else to add to chapter 8?
No, I think we can move on to chapter 9.
All right. Well, I'll start with chapter 9. Deuteronomy 9. It says, "Listen, Israel, today you are about to cross the Jordan to go and drive out nations greater and stronger than you, with large cities fortified to the heavens. The people are strong and tall, the descendants of the Anakim. You know about them, and you have heard it said about them. Who can stand up to the sons of Anak? But understand that today the Lord your God will cross over ahead of you as a consuming fire. He will devastate and subdue them before you. You will drive them out and destroy them swiftly, as the Lord has told you. When the Lord your God drives them out before you, do not say to yourself, 'The Lord brought me in to take possession of this land because of my righteousness.' Instead, the Lord will drive out these nations before you because of your wickedness. You are not going to take possession of their land because of your righteousness or your integrity. Instead, the Lord your God will drive out these nations before you because of their wickedness, in order to keep the promise He swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand that the Lord your God is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are a stiff-necked people." I'm just going to stop real quick right there. Three times He says to them, "I'm not doing this because you are righteous." I just think, I made that joke that Deuteronomy was written because men need to be told twice. Right. So he's telling them 3 times. I mean, he's repeating himself constantly in the Torah. Deuteronomy as a book repeats itself from what we've read from Exodus through Numbers.
Right.
And then within Deuteronomy, he's repeating himself continually, which I think is hilarious.
Well,
because
he knows us.
he knows we always need to be told over
Yeah.
and over and over again. So that's why some of this sometimes can read as redundant. But I think, well, not only is it mathematically encoded like we talked about last week, but I think that it's he's literally just knows we are forgetful people and we're stiff-necked, like he's saying, and we just need to be reminded constantly. Verse 7, he says, "Remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God in the wilderness. You have been rebelling against the Lord from the day you left the land of Egypt until you reached this place. You provoked the Lord at Horeb, and he was angry enough with you to destroy you. And when I went up to the mountain to receive the stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant the Lord made with you, I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I did not eat bread or drink water. And on the day of the assembly, the Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets inscribed by God's fingers. The exact words were on them, which the Lord spoke to you from the fire of the mountain. The Lord gave me the 2 stone tablets, the tablets of the covenant, at the end of the 40 days and 40 nights. The Lord said to me, Get up and go immediately down from here. For your people you brought out of Egypt have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned from the way that I commanded them. They have made a cast image for themselves. The Lord also said to me, I have seen this people, and indeed they are a stiff-necked people. Leave me alone, and I will destroy them and blot out their name under heaven. Then I will make you into a nation stronger and more numerous than they. So I went back down the mountain, while it was blazing with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands. I saw how you had sinned against the Lord your God. You had made a calf image for yourselves. You had quickly turned from the way the Lord had commanded for you. So I took hold of the tablets and threw them from my hands, shattering them before your eyes. Then I fell down, like the first time, in the presence of the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights more. I did not eat bread or drink water because of all the sin you committed, doing what was evil in the Lord's sight, and provoking him to anger. I was afraid of the fierce anger of the Lord had directed against you, because he was about to destroy you. But again, the Lord listened to me on that occasion. The Lord was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him, but I prayed for Aaron at that time also. I took the sinful calf you made, burned it up and crushed it, thoroughly grinded it to powder as fine as dust. Then I threw it into the stream that came down from the mountain. You continued to provoke the Lord at Taberah, Massa, and Kibroth-hattaavah, when the Lord sent you from Kadesh Barnea. He said, Go up and possess the land I've given you. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You did not believe or obey him. You have been rebelling against the Lord ever since I've known you. I fell down in the presence of the Lord 40 days and 40 nights, because the Lord had threatened to destroy you. I prayed to the Lord, Lord God, do not annihilate your people, your inheritance whom you redeemed through your greatness and brought out of Egypt with a strong hand. Remember your servant Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Disregard this people's stubbornness and their wickedness and sin. Otherwise, those in the land you brought us from will say, because the Lord wasn't able to bring them into the land he promised them, and because he hated them, he brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. But they are your people, your inheritance, Lord, whom you brought out by your great power and outstretched arm. Well, there's so much in there. My goodness. I think there's the first thing I wanted to say was Moses was hungry. Okay, guys.
You mean hangry?
Hangry. That's another thing, right? Okay. Not only was he apparently, I don't know, we probably have to go back to Exodus and see exactly how many days it was from coming down the mountain, breaking the tablets, and then going back up the mountain.
Right.
But if he just did an immediate turnaround, we're talking 80 days without food and water.
Yeah.
What? That's the longest fast I've ever seen in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating, to this idea of being in the presence of the Lord for a lengthy period of time. But not only was he up there just receiving, it didn't take God 40 days each time to write down some things. That's a very slow writer, okay? He was being shown the true tabernacle, right? We get this in Hebrews chapter 4.
Yeah.
That Moses was, and we also get it in the Apocalypse of Abraham and other places. Not that, I apologize, not Apocalypse of Abraham. I think it's Second Baruch. But we get it in other books where it says that Moses was actually being shown some stuff, much more than just getting the commandment, the 10 Commandments. He was getting shown, that's why he was instructed to make the artifacts and the the lampstand and the showbread table and everything that he made for the actual tabernacle for the Levites. He gave them the dimension, like the engineering specs, right? Because he saw the true tabernacle, the one that God resides in above the firmament. He had a vision, whether he was, I imagine it was a vision, but He saw amazing things for a long time. The point is, he's up there a long time.
Yeah.
He gets the tablets at the end of the 40 days, and he's coming back down. But here's the interesting part. We always think, or at least the way, the Charlton Heston movie, right? Ten Commandments, he's coming down with the big beard, and then he sees what they're doing. He gets all mad. And he's like, oh, and he throws them down like in anger. When I read this, I think he was putting on a show. Because remember, God already told him on the mountain, hey, they're sinning.
Yeah, it's not like he was surprised by what he found when he got down there.
It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. He could have left the tablets up there.
Yeah.
And come down without the tablets, because he already knew they corrupted the covenant they just entered into. But instead, he takes the tablets with him, and he puts on a show and throws it down in front of him. Right? Look what you guys have done. You've just broken the covenant.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's funny to me, because it's like it's showing some personality, from Moses. He's throwing some guilt on him. You know what I mean?
And
like
then he, melts everything down and, crushes it into powder and makes them drink it. Like, he was not playing around.
And I don't see that instructed by Yahweh.
Right.
And I think that was just his own idea.
Yeah.
He's just like, you really like this cat?
He was resourceful.
Yeah. So I think that's really wild, because it kind of, I always thought it was interesting. It kind of gives me a little bit of insight to some of the personality of Moses.
Yeah.
And because he's a character, man. And sweetie, what did you have? Did you have any ideas for the chapter 9? Anything spark a thought to you?
Okay, well, what I find interesting, of course, is how he's telling them, I'm not driving these people out because of your righteousness. Mm-hmm. And then 2 portions ago, in our first episode, we had been talking about the descendants of Esau having a portion, having an inheritance, and the father also driving out a bunch of ites from the land that his descendants received. And so that's another thing that I just wanted to point out, is that it's the same for Esau and his descendants.
That's true. Okay.
The father didn't push those people out because of the righteousness of Esau's descendants. He pushed them out because of their wickedness. There's also promises involved and things
because
like
of the
that.
Inhabitants of the land's wickedness, the Nephilim clans.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just find that an interesting tie back to something we had talked about in a prior Torah portion. Just because, again, I think we have this blanket statement about Esau, and then we kind of just move on. Yeah. But we forget he was, his descendants were still part of this story. But not necessarily because of their righteousness.
Right.
So,
and which is, he does it for the Ammonites as well, right. And because they talked about them kicking out the Rephaim, and I don't know. It's very possible that was the same reason that he's doing it for them too. Again, not because, and this to me shows a really strong differentiation between mankind and Nephilim kind.
Right.
Because we don't see any story in that I can remember in Scripture where a nation of men, is being supernaturally driven out of a certain geography by God, because they make treaties, their emissaries are sent, repentance is called, Nineveh, right? You send a prophet to Nineveh for repentance. You know what I'm saying? Instead of just driving them out, they're doing pagan practices and worship, right? You didn't just supernaturally drive them out with, naturalistic means or any other means, right? But only with these specific clans that we see mentioned, Deuteronomy chapters 2 and 3, that are repeated to us, coming back from Exodus, in Exodus 7 and Exodus 23. It's just these inhabitants that came into the land that were not supposed to be there ever.
Right, because we have, the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, we have prior instances of actual judgment being rendered on human beings, or who knows what kind of people were living in Sodom and Gomorrah. But it is interesting here to note that he's driving these people out of the land, and not just, raining down fire and brimstone on them to just completely destroy them all in one fell swoop. This was a process that the Father seems to be going through over a long period of time, using many means, mainly the children of Israel, and it sounds like some insects and stuff here and there. Yeah. So. Yeah,
he's using different people, many different ways, I guess, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. And one other thing I just wanted to point out, and this goes through the whole Torah, but specifically while we're reading here in chapter 9, it's talking about Moses going up and praying for the people. And I think that because of, what we're all kind of bathed in Christianity, we have some semblance of an understanding of Yeshua being our intercessor or our mediator, but we don't really, just like Moses was, and they can make that comparison, but they don't compare him as a priest. Moses, what he's doing here is these are duties of a priest to be mediating. It wasn't just Moses. We see there's more than just. A lot of people will say Moses was under the Melchizedek priesthood, and then we have the Levites, so there is that dichotomy there. But
he wasn't the high priest,
right?
But he's still
Moses
priest.
he's doing the duties of a priest, and
consequently he's a Levite. So,
right, so that's one of the things that I just wanted to point out to people, that not only does understanding the resurrection and the day of the Lord and the New Jerusalem totally help you, really just the whole book falls, all the pieces fall into place. But when you really understand the priesthoods and the role and function of priests, not just the high priest, but both priesthoods, I mean, when you understand that, as you're reading through, you'll start to notice those, more kind of, below the surface details that you're not really taught about in church at all. And honestly, I don't see much talking of the significance of the priesthoods even in our crowd, our little Torah corner of the world. I don't see a whole lot of focus on the role of a priest, the role of a high priest. So that's just another little detail that I always notice so much now when I'm reading the Torah, now that I understand that better.
So later on, when we see the prophecy about I'll raise up a prophet like unto Moses, right? This is a wonderful, little wink and a nod towards Yeshua being our priest who mediates before the Father, 2 Timothy 2:5 and Hebrews 5:7-10.
According to the same
order to possibly the same Melchizedek order that Moses was a part of.
Yeah.
And that's, I know there's, some people don't agree with that fully. Some, it's definitely a different topic, but he's doing all the priestly duties, and he's king over the people.
That's the main thing I wanted to point out, is that he's not just a mediator, intercessor. Like, let's get back to the actual terms, guys. Like, he was doing what a priest does. Yeah. He even did what a priest does for Pharaoh in Egypt. Pharaoh is like asking him, go make supplication for me to your God to make these plagues stop. And Pharaoh and Moses did it, and the plagues ceased for the moment. So that's also interesting to me, that he even, performs duties for a non-believer.
Even though he knew and was told.
Yeah.
But in Exodus 3 that what was going to happen in the course of events with the Pharaoh in Egypt, he went through the motions anyway. Right. I think that's interesting. Yeah. So that actually reminds me of the book of Enoch, with the rebellious angels and Enoch bringing their petition before the Father, and the Father's like, nope, you're not getting mercy, because of their deeds were so heinous. But interesting. So yes, great point, sweetie. Great point. Chapter 10, I think, is where we pick up. Okay. And do you want to pick up chapter 10?
I suppose it's only fair. It's my turn.
Okay.
All right. Deuteronomy chapter 10. The Lord said to me at that time, cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and come to me on the mountain and make a wooden ark. I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets you broke, and you are to place them in the ark. So I made an ark of acacia wood, cut 2 stone tablets like the first ones, and climbed the mountain with the 2 tablets in my hand. Then on the day of the assembly, the Lord wrote on the tablets what had been written previously, the 10 commandments that he had spoken to you on the mountain from the fire. The Lord gave them to me, and I went back down the mountain and placed the tablets in the ark I had made. And they have remained there as the Lord commanded me. The Israelites traveled from Beeroth Benejachan to Moserah. Aaron died and was buried there, and Eleazar his son became priest in his place. They traveled from there to Gudgodah, and from Gudgodah to Jotbathah, a land with streams of water. At that time the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, to stand before the Lord to serve him, and to bless in his name as it is today. For this reason Levi does not have a portion or inheritance like his brothers. The Lord is his inheritance, as the Lord your God told him. I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights like the first time. The Lord also listened to me on this occasion. He agreed not to annihilate you. Then the Lord said to me, get up, continue your journey ahead of the people, so that they may enter and possess the land I swore to give their fathers. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you, except to fear the Lord your God by walking in all his ways, to love him, and to worship the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul? Keep the Lord's commands and statutes I am giving you today for your own good. The heavens, indeed the highest heavens, belong to the Lord your God, as does the earth and everything in it. Yet the Lord was devoted to your fathers and loved them. He chose their descendants after them. He chose you out of all the peoples as it is today. Therefore, circumcise your hearts and don't be stiff-necked any longer. For the Lord your God is the God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, mighty, and awesome God, showing no partiality and taking no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreign resident, giving him food and clothing. You must also love the foreigner, since you are foreigners in the land of Egypt. You are to fear the Lord your God and worship him. Remain faithful to him and take oaths in his name. He is your praise and he is your God, who has done for you these great and awesome works your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt, 70 people in all, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars of the sky.
All right. Thank you, sweetie. First thoughts?
Well, I noticed there were some other definitions being laid out for us. We have him telling us to, well, them, but us by proxy, to circumcise your hearts and don't be stiff-necked any longer. So that's another thing that I think people have really gotten mixed up in the mainstream Christianity, and really even still kind of in our little corner of the world here. We have to circumcise our own hearts right now. The circumcised heart that we are promised is not something that we actually physically receive until the resurrection, when we're given brand new bodies and brand new hearts that he himself has circumcised and put his law on there. So for right now, while we're still under the first covenant, it is our responsibility to circumcise our hearts. And how does he define that? He defines it by not being stiff-necked and obeying his commandments. Walking in his commandments is how we circumcise our own hearts.
And in the New Testament language, this is something Jesus in Matthew 28 called discipleship.
Right.
So he also in John 17, he calls it sanctification.
Yes.
Right? So this is the idea that you are sanctifying yourself with the word of truth because you're obeying the instructions of God. And this is a discipleship idea.
Right. And sanctification means set yourself apart.
Yes.
It's this fancy word for what really Christianity tries to teach people, to be set apart from the world and not live worldly lives. They just don't have the dictionary definition.
Well,
from
the Torah
our
yeah,
what I call our dictionary. They just don't have that as part of the teaching. So same thing with circumcised hearts, though. I mean, a lot of...
Don't get us wrong. The church teaches change behavior.
Right.
99 out of 100 churches will teach you, if you come to Christ,
right,
that you must put away the old self, put on the new self that you've adopted. You must learn to be a disciple of Jesus, right? You must learn to walk in the Spirit and to walk in love. But they don't define these terms as defined by the Scriptures. Right. So when a lot of the newbies that come in, well, they're like, oh, I just need to read my Bible so I can walk in the Spirit. And they don't know what that means. They don't know that Paul explained to us that to set your mind in the Spirit is to be subjected to the law of God.
Well, and if you think your heart is already circumcised and the law is already on it and you're just naturally going to walk in it, you kind of don't have any incentive to read the law.
That's what I was saying. They don't make the connection. They don't make the final connector with all that verbiage to then say, and here is how you actually practically do that. Here's how you do that in your day-to-day decisions. Are you lining them up with the instructions of God for living given to us in his commandments? That's the only way you disciple yourself or do discipleship with someone else, whether older as a mentor status or younger in a Bible study status or an accountability status. And that's the only way you can sanctify yourself and grow with him daily, is to adhere your behavior to the commandments of God. And that's how you will start to look like Jesus.
Right.
That's the only way it happens. Yeah. It doesn't happen just because of the way you feel about it that day.
Right. And it's not a magical overnight, you profess with your mouth and believe in your heart, and poof, your heart is circumcised and the law is written on it, and
suddenly you can do no wrong.
Somehow that means you can ignore parts of the law, that you don't think are important anymore. We all know that, the logic isn't quite in place there, because they're not building on the foundation of the Torah. Their foundation, as we know, is mostly just the New Testament, and the Torah is kind of, the whole Old Testament is kind of just this. You flip back there for a neat story every now and then, a good lesson, but not actually how to walk this out.
Yeah.
If you want to be sanctified, well, the Torah tells you exactly how to do that, how to set yourself apart from the world.
And that's why I love Deuteronomy. It could be why Jesus quoted from Deuteronomy so much.
Yeah.
And I think he quoted from that more than any other book.
Yeah.
But that's why I love it, because it gives you the practical day-to-day. You can walk it out easily. Yeah. And even tells you that it's not too difficult for you. God, even in Deuteronomy, as the Father is explaining his commandments and encouraging them to keep the commandments, he tells them they're not too difficult for you. So this is why we see Jesus later on saying that my burden is light. Right? My yoke is light and is not burdensome. And so, because it's not. Because this is called the law of freedom.
Yeah. Well, and that's
God's definition of the law, according to him, is freedom.
That's another kind of neat definition of phrases that I stumbled upon probably in the last year. He talks about the yoke, and I never really knew what a yoke was until I was listening to Proverbs, I think, one day, and it was talking about putting his commandments on you like a yoke. And I thought, oh gosh, Yeshua talked about his yoke. Let me go look up what that is. Well, as many probably already know, I'm just late to the game. The yoke is that device, I guess you would call it, that they put onto an animal, or to put two animals together, an ox or something.
Yeah, it's like a big wooden crossbar.
Yeah, that directs them and guides them. And so when we are told to put the yoke of the commandments onto our neck, that is literally telling us how to sanctify ourselves, how to circumcise our own hearts. Is you put his commandments around and let those guide you.
That's right. And when Jesus says his yoke is light and easy, he's saying his guidance is light and easy. It's not a burden.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's wonderful, sweetie. Exactly right. One thing that popped out to me in chapter 10 here that I think is fun to bring up is in verse 14. It says, "The heavens, indeed, the highest heavens, belong to the Lord your God, as does the earth and everything in it." So since we were talking about scriptural definitions of things,
Ruh-roh.
let's look at the scriptural definition real quick of the word heaven. Because what did we just read here? This is the heavens, indeed, the highest heavens. So how can there be one heaven higher than another?
Right.
We hear Paul in 2 Corinthians 12 talking about third heaven.
Yep.
We see in the Psalms it talks about the highest heavens as well. But there's that he in Isaiah talks about him dwelling in the highest heaven.
He is the Most High.
He is literally the Most High. What does that mean? Are these directional words literal? Or is this just idiomatic figurative language? Will the context tell us? Will God himself in his own definitions tell us the definitions of words? So if we look in Genesis 1, verse 6 through 8, it tells us on day 2 of creation, God created a firmament to divide the waters above from the waters below. And then in verse 8 he says, "And God called the firmament the word heaven." So this structure called the firmament, which is dividing waters above and below, he called that word heaven. So he gave it a name. He gave the structure a name, right? Do you call your house, that collection of stone and wood and nails? No. Right. Do you use wood and stone and nails to make your house? Yes. But once it's done, you call it something.
Yeah.
Right?
You call it a house.
You call it a house.
Yeah.
So when God was done with the firmament on day 2, he called it heaven. He called a structure heaven, not an ethereal, interdimensional, non-corporeal existence of wispiness. He did not define that as heaven. He called a structure.
Yeah, a hard structure.
A hardened structure that is supporting waters above it, heaven. And there are multiple layers of heaven, as we see throughout the rest of Scripture. And in fact, at the return of Messiah, when the kingdom comes, this is an essential definition to understand when you're reading about the descriptions of Yeshua returning with the angels to root out the wicked in the land, and the New Jerusalem comes down. He says he rolls back the firmament, which is the word heaven, right? Interchangeable, guys.
Yeah.
Heaven and the firmament, interchangeable all throughout the Bible. Therefore, the firmament itself is mentioned a handful of times in the Bible, right? Genesis 1, Genesis 7, Psalm 19, just a handful of times, right? Not very much. I think it's in 2 Samuel 6 with Hannah's prayer.
We have vaulted dome mentioned
Amos
in
9,
Amos.
Yeah, but as far as, if we look at the definition given to that, right, is called the heaven. Well, we get the word heaven over 400 times in Scripture.
Yep.
So just think about this. I just want to challenge folks this week when you're reading your scriptures. Anytime you see the word heaven, remember that that is the name given to a completed structure.
Yeah.
It was a completed work of the Father, and then he named it something. Just like he completed Adam, he didn't call Adam dust, right?
Right.
I know a lot of people say, well, Adamah in the Hebrew means dirt. But the point is, he didn't create Eve and say, you're a rib.
Right.
Right? He gave her a name. She was a completed work. He gave it a name. The firmament on day 2 was a completed work. It was a structure in which all of creation is inside of.
Yeah.
And there's multiple layers to this structure, and it's called heaven. So we can have phrases like this in Deuteronomy 10:14, which says there's a heaven, and then there's a highest heaven.
Yeah.
And the Father, Yahweh, is the Most High,
Yeah.
which means he's on the highest level
Yeah.
of heaven, okay? So you remember, this is a Gen X reference here, but remember the old Atari game Donkey Kong, right? He had to get up the ladders and get to the different levels, okay? Scripture describes multiple layers,
Right.
and different things are happening in different layers of the creation. So I just want to challenge folks with that. As you're reading through the scriptures, every time, even in the New Testament, every time you see the word heaven used, they're talking about a structure.
Yeah.
They're talking about an actual building, if you will. This is why Abraham looked for a kingdom to come that was a city whose architect and builder was God, and it's coming down 1,500 miles square through an actual structure that's being rolled back so that it can allow it to come down.
Yeah.
Right? Because right now that structure is holding water above it. How do we know that? Genesis 7:11 says the windows of the firmament were opened and water poured down initiated the flood and the flood of Noah.
Right.
Psalm 148:4 says there's still waters above the firmament. So I just want to encourage folks, when we use the scriptural definitions of these things that are mentioned, it includes the creation. We can't just blow by these things and think, oh, well, he just meant, he just gave them that because they didn't understand. If he'd have told them the truth, they wouldn't have got it. So therefore, he just told them a story that they would have understood. And no, man, I've heard that excuse from many people. Other people just outright ignore the definitions of these words, and all they want to do is continue with what we've been taught by people who reject God.
Yeah.
So I really want to stress this real quick, okay, guys? There is a different creation that we've been told in our modern society that does not line up with the definitions in this book. The people that told us that different definition reject God.
Right.
They lie and reject God. So I don't know how to stress this any stronger here. We either got God's descriptions of things to lead us and to guide us, or we can take man's descriptions of things, which has brought nothing but confusion, and those same men don't even believe the book.
Right.
And they're trying to tell us how to read the book.
Well, and why are we coming out of the churches and coming out of Babylon, as a lot of people put it? Why are we doing that and coming out of the lies into the truth and still bringing lies into that with us and still holding on to this concept of not using his book to define our terms? We'll use his book to define our terms when it comes to obedience and circumcising the heart and following, walking like Yeshua walked, and that's all fine and great. But some people, then that's where they stop. They want to take everything else literally, even the age of the earth, all of that. The flood, that's literal, all of that. But when it comes to the first thing he described to us in the book is the creation and how he made it and what it looks like.
Yeah, with over 400 references.
Right, and then why do we just we throw that out? I mean, we might as well just go right back into the churches, really, because it's hypocrisy to say you want to take the book as literal as you can, wherever you can, unless it's telling you this is not literal, this is a vision, this is a parable. But then when it comes to this issue of the firmament, everyone kind of just wants to pretend like that's not really, that word doesn't really say what we think it says. It doesn't mean what he says it means. It means something different. And this is just this is why this is some of the branches on the context tree of our channel is understanding the firmament,
understanding the creation
is as important as understanding the resurrection and the day of the Lord and the priesthoods and these other topics that we've been talking about, these core concepts of context. I mean, this is the room that the story takes place in, and so we can't just pretend like he didn't tell us exactly what that room looks like.
That's right. So imagine all the instructions we get in Leviticus and Numbers and Exodus, all the instructions we get for the tabernacle.
Right.
Okay. They had specific instructions how to make the tabernacle. dimensions on how wide and how, all the dimensions for everything. Like I talked about before, because Moses was shown what the heavenly tabernacle was like. And within those instructions, after the priests knew how to do that, so they knew how to make the dimensions for the ark, the showbread, the lamps, this far from here, there, you know what I'm saying? The bronze altar, the brazen altar. Imagine if we didn't have any of those descriptions, but instead the story just kept going. And we see these priests walking into an area, going up here and doing something on something that's not named.
Yeah.
Splashing blood on something that we didn't know what was there and why.
Yeah.
Right? Then going into the Holy of Holies once a year, doing something in there for some reason, not knowing why. Coming out, washing himself. Why? Why is there water there? He didn't tell us. Where did the water come from? And why does he need to wash himself and change his clothes? All the instructions for movement around the parameters and the descriptions of the tabernacle, all the places that the priests would go and do different things. If we didn't get the layout of the house they were in doing those things, none of the instructions would make any sense. And that's what we've been sold. That's the lie we've been sold from people who don't believe the book.
Yeah.
Have sold the lie that all the instructions for the story that takes place in a house that God built on day one, that God exists in himself at the top of it. In this big structure, we've been told to ignore all the details of the place of the house where this story takes place. So then when we see all the characters moving around in this story and doing stuff, it's like madness trying to figure out what's going on.
It's like what we're told in church, where we need to pay attention to all these characters in the New Testament, but don't go back and learn the backstory of all that and why they're doing the things that they're doing. I mean, it's no different.
It's so I want to encourage folks, as a quick reminder, Deuteronomy 10:14. There's a heaven mention, which is the word firmament, and there's a highest heavens, which is the word firmament.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've been given the definition for the word heaven from the very beginning.
Yeah. We
just have to believe it. That's all it boils down to. All right, guys.
We'll get off that soapbox now.
Chapter 11. Was it my turn to read?
And we're only going through how many till 25. Okay.
Yeah. All right, guys. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, "Therefore, love the Lord your God and always keep his mandate and his statutes, ordinances, and commands. You must understand today that this is not your children who experienced or saw the discipline of the Lord your God. His greatness, his strong hand and outstretched arm, his signs and the works he did in Egypt to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and all his land. What he did to Egypt's army, its horses and chariots, when he made the waters of the Red Sea flow over them as they pursued you, and he destroyed them completely. What he did to you in the wilderness until you reached this place. And what he did to Dathan and Abiram and the sons of Eliab and the Reubenite, when in the middle of the whole Israelite camp, the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed them, their households, their tents, and every living thing with them. Your own eyes have seen very great work the Lord has done. So keep every command I am giving you today, so that you may have the strength to cross into and possess the land you are to inherit, and so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God swore to your fathers to give them and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. For the land you are entering to possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come, where you sowed your seed and irrigated by hand as in a vegetable garden. But the land you are entering to possess is a land of mountains and valleys watered by rain from the sky. It is a land the Lord your God cares for. He is always watching over it from the beginning to the end of the year. If you carefully obey my commands I am giving you today, to love the Lord your God and worship him with all your heart and all your soul, I will provide rain for your land in season, the early and late rains, and you will harvest your grain, new wine, and oil. I will provide grass in your fields to your livestock. You will eat and be satisfied. So be careful that you are not enticed to turn aside and worship and bow down to other gods. Then the Lord's anger will burn against you. He will close the sky, and there will be no rain. The Lord will not yield its produce, and you will perish quickly from the good land the Lord has given you. Impress these words of mine on your hearts and souls. Bind them as a sign on your hands. Let them be a symbol on your foreheads. Teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, so that as long as the heavens are above the earth. What was that? As long as the heavens, the firmaments are above the earth, your days and those of your children may be many in the land the Lord swore to give your fathers. For if you carefully observe every one of these commands I'm giving you to follow, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways and remain faithful to him, the Lord will drive out all the nations before you, and you will drive out nations greater and stronger than you are, Every place the sole of your foot treads will be yours. Your territory will extend from the wilderness to Lebanon, and from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean Sea. No one will be able to stand against you. The Lord your God will put fear and dread of you in all the land where you set foot, as he has promised you.
All right.
Interesting. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Obviously, we're getting a recap again from, even in not just last week, but even in what we've already read this week. He's just reminding them again. And that's why this book is called the Book of Remembrance. He's reminding them again and again and again. And he's promising them some details, agricultural details, comparing it to Egypt. But also, he's just saying, look, if you impress these on your hearts and souls, right, which is no wonder the first commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Yeah. Right? Because he's trying to say, if you do these, and I love how it starts out in 11:1. He says, therefore love the Lord your God and always keep his mandate and his statutes, ordinances, and commands. So he's just, it's unique because on one hand, he's saying, look, if you do these, they'll go well with you, right? We got that, I think, in chapter 6. Mm-hmm. And then over here, he's saying, he's making an appeal. He's saying, look at everything I've done for you, and look at what I want to promise you to take you to. And if you do these, you'll live, and that's what we talked about last time, this eternal inheritance, as Jesus explained to us in Luke 10. But now he's talking about love. Yeah. Right? So now he's kind of trying to bring it home to them. He's trying to make an impact on them. He's talking about stuff like your heart and your soul, right? And land flowing milk and honey, a place where, I think it's interesting that he has to mention to them, this is a place with mountains and a sky with rain that comes down from the sky. I just think it's interesting. But he's painting a good picture. He's speaking tenderly to them, and he's trying to encourage them to keep his ways so that they can maintain and not be destroyed. Right. Right. And so I think that's pretty fascinating. Sweetie, anything pop out to you in this one?
No, I pretty much agree with everything you've said. And, when you read the Torah on a regular basis, it really just reminds you of Yeshua saying that the two great commands are to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself, and how all of the law and prophets hang on that. And we can see here clearly in these chapters that we're reading in Deuteronomy that there's a very good reason that all the law hangs on especially that first commandment of you loving God, because the Father says to love him is to keep his commandments and walk in his ways. And so it would only follow that all of the law is going to hang on you keeping that first commandment, that first greatest commandment, to love him with all your heart. So
absolutely. So we have a short pairing after we've finished our main portion. We have a short pairing from the Torah itself. Okay, we like to do this because it's
context.
It gives us great context.
We love context.
So it's from chapter 23, verses 24 through 30. Do you want to read this one?
Sure, yeah.
Start about 24 and go through 30.
24 through 30. Okay. You must not bow down to their gods or worship them. Do not imitate their practices. Instead, demolish them and smash their sacred pillars to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and your water. I will take away your illnesses. No woman will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you the full number of your days. I will cause the people ahead of you to feel terror and throw into confusion all the nations you come to. I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you and retreat. I will send the hornet in front of you, and it will drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites away from you. I will not drive them out ahead of you in a single year. Otherwise, the land will become desolate, and wild animals would multiply against you. I will drive them out little by little ahead of you until you have become numerous and take possession of the land. So I think it's obvious why we, to you guys, why we chose that pairing. It's also, interesting that he says there, I won't drive them out in a single year. I'm going to take some time. And why does he say that?
So that the animals wouldn't become too numerous.
Right. If he did it all at once, apparently,
the Israelites would have been
they'd be fighting off the animals then instead of just all the ites.
So he's, in a strange way, it's like he's considering the ecology of the land and what's going on there.
Well, he made covenant with the land too.
He cares about the land. He cares about all of it. So I think it's interesting that he does mention, it's just a reiteration from what we already read. Right. But Exodus comes first in chronology, right? So this was actually a short summary that the chapters from like chapter 8 through 11 that we just read in Deuteronomy kind of fleshed out with greater detail and with lots of more repetition to the commandments. But as far as just a quick summary of what he's promising through those chapters we read in our Torah portion, we get that summarized in Exodus 23 here. He's hitting all the main points.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Even down to the hornets.
Yeah.
He's hitting all the same things. And what I think is interesting here is in verse 20, it's Exodus 23:26.
Okay.
And this is the verse where it says, "No woman will miscarry or be barren in your land. I will give you the full number of your days." And that's why is that interesting, baby? Why would that be interesting? So, I'm sorry, I didn't put you on the spot, but I'm thinking, like, imagine if you're the wife of Moses. You're getting all these commands. Not even Moses. Say you're the wife of just a regular Israelite in the crowd. Okay, in the crowd of hundreds of thousands. You're in the crowd and you're the wife. You got the kids pulling on you. There's fire on the mountain. they're it's like it's the best 4th of July you've ever had. You know what I'm saying? So maybe. I mean, some of them were scared. But the point is, you've got the thundering voice of God happening, and then he comes down with all these extra instructions, right? These extra, because if I'm not mistaken, what we read in Deuteronomy, I think chapter 5, was they only heard the 10 Commandments spoken.
Yes, and then they said, we can't
take anymore. Right?
You go get them for us.
Yeah. So then all this additional instruction
Right.
was received over, later at the 80 days, I guess. So, but the point is, they're then reading off the additional instructions, right? And you're just a random lady who's married to a random guy from, say, like the tribe of Asher, okay? And you're just hanging out with your kids, and you hear this. And you hear that if you keep all these commandments, these are the things that's going to happen to you. You're going to have security of provisions. You're going to have safety in the land from threats and predecessors, even from the animals. Yeah. And you'll be able to have children without problem. Is this a motivator for the ladies to encourage their husbands to do what's right?
I would say so.
Is this like a built-in incentive system for accountability between husband and wife? I'm just throwing that out there.
I would say so.
It could be, but to me, like that, all these things are promises that are supposed to be, I don't want to say exciting, but just they're supposed to be like, incentive. They're supposed to be, look, these are the good things I'm promising you if you would just keep following my commands, right? That's all God's trying to say. Just keep adjusting your behavior to my commands. We got the priesthood set up so that when you fail, we'll make atonement for you. But just over time, continue to practice and get more ingrained in your hearts and souls my commands. Do them with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. But to the ladies, they're being promised, what's the best word I can use? A fruitful womb. You know what I'm saying? They're being promised, which what a lot of women, especially in that culture back then, that was considered a sign of honor, was to bear children, right? We're in a much different culture today. Very feministic influenced culture that tries to discourage that idea of the honor that women have, which is to actually have a child. But back then, those ladies didn't think like that, as far as we understand from Scripture. They actually valued this idea of becoming pregnant and starting a family and having abundance of children, not just one, having lots of children. So I just think that's fascinating. It's like God's speaking to everybody, if I could just say it like that, right?
He's also, again, defining his terms. I mean, the whole covenant can be summed up with, you agree to follow my commands and I agree to take you as my people. And so the terms that he's defining here in these areas are, he's defining what it means for him to take us as his people. It means you'll be blessed in all these great ways.
All these great ways. Even a bunch of little chitlins running around. All these great ways. Okay, so.
I'm sure that was a blessing for some.
Yeah, you've got no privacy. You got like 5 kids in a tent traveling around the wilderness for 40 years. I don't know if these tents had segregated rooms. So I'm guessing the parents never had privacy.
Yeah, I would imagine.
You had working on that loving, faithful patience all throughout the desert. Anyway, so the next pairing that we have is from Jeremiah 11. And I'm going to flip over there right quick. I say that silly like, because Jeremiah is a huge book. So sometimes you got to flip a bit. All right. Jeremiah 11, verse 1 through 8 is our pairing from one of the prophets. And it says, "This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Listen to the words of this covenant and tell them to the men of Judah and residents of Jerusalem. You must tell them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let a curse be on the man who does not obey the words of this covenant, which I commanded your ancestors. When I brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the iron furnace, I declared, obey me and do everything I command you, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. In order to establish the oath I swore to your ancestors to give them, a land flowing with milk and honey, as it is today. I answered, Amen, Lord. The Lord said to me, proclaim all these words in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. Obey the words of this covenant and carry them out. For I strongly warned your ancestors when I brought them out of the land of Egypt until today, warning them time and time again. Obey my voice. Yet they would not obey or pay attention. Each one followed the stubbornness of his evil heart. So I brought on them all the curses of this covenant, because they had not done what I commanded them to do. All right.
Should be obvious why we chose that passage there.
Yeah, he's reminding them of everything we read in Deuteronomy, and I love the fact that he's even saying, I told you time and time again.
I told you over and over again.
Yeah, it's Deuteronomy's hilarious. So, okay, so that was from Jeremiah 11, and so let's look at Psalm 78, and we'll see verses 1 through 17. So this is our pairing from Psalms 78, verses 1 through 17. Would you like to read this, sweetie?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. My people, hear my instruction. Listen to what I say. I will declare wise sayings. I will speak mysteries from the past, things we have heard and known that our fathers have passed down to us. We must not hide them from our children, but must tell a future generation the praises of the Lord, his might, and the wonderful works he has performed. He established a testimony in Jacob and set up a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children, so that a future generation, children yet to be born, might know. They were to rise and tell their children, so that they might put their confidence in God and not forget God's works, but keep his commandments. Then they would not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not loyal and whose spirit was not faithful to God. The Ephraimite archers turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant and refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonderful works he had shown them. He worked wonders in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, the region of Zoan. He split the sea and brought them across. The water stood firm like a wall. He led them with a cloud by day and with a fiery light throughout the night. He split rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as abundant as the depths. He brought streams out of the stone and made water flow down like rivers. But they continued to sin against him, rebelling in the desert against the Most High.
So,
again, that should be obvious why we picked that pairing.
Yeah. Yeah, they just keeps talking about the covenant and the law, and they didn't do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just sad because he had led them into the geographical area of the kingdom to come.
Yeah.
And told them his behavior of the kingdom to come.
Yeah.
And expressed to them that how it was righteous behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that here's all the benefits that's going to happen if you do this. Not only if you do this, but in the kingdom to come, you'll live forever, right? You will have life. Do these and you will live. You get the promise, because this was the same covenant, right, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that was promised to be there forever, that they would live in this land of promise forever with their descendants.
Yeah.
That was the core crux of the promise to Abraham, and therefore they were given all the details. They were taken there, led by the hand, so to speak, protected, given great promises, and giving the how-to, right? The guide to behavior once you get there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's amazing that he basically served it all up on a plate for them as much as he could. And it's still, there was some people that just decided to rebel and break the covenant in the terms of it and forget him, right? Which was to stop doing the covenant.
Yeah.
They forgot him. So we had that term defined for us in, what was it, chapter 8, right?
Yep.
Deuteronomy 8. All right, let's look at the pairing from the New Testament, also called the Brit, and it's in chapter 7 of Acts. So I'm going to flip over there real quick. And in Acts 7, this I believe is where Stephen is given a little bit of a reminder of the history of Israel right before he's stoned by the Pharisees.
Yep.
So this is kind of his last words, if you will.
Yeah.
But we're going to be reading from verses 35 through 53. So if you're following along, this is Acts 7, 35 through 53. And he says in 35, he says, "This Moses, whom they rejected when they said, 'Who appointed you ruler and judge?' This one God sent as a ruler and a redeemer by means of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out and performed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, at the Red Sea, and in the desert for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the sons of Israel, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers. He is the one who was in the congregation in the desert, together with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our forefathers he received living oracles to give to us. Our forefathers were unwilling to obey him, but pushed him away, and in their hearts they turned back to Egypt. They told Aaron, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. So they even made a calf in those days, offered sacrifice to the idol, and were celebrating what their hands had made. Then God turned away and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. By the way, guys, did y'all just see that? There's that word heaven again. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, it says, I'm going to read that again for the context of what I'm about to read. Verse 42. Then God turned away and gave them up to the worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. Did you bring me offerings and sacrifices for 40 years in the desert, O house of Israel? But you took up the tin of Moloch and star of Remphan and images that you made to worship. So I will deport you beyond Babylon. Now I just want to stop real quick. Now, even though we chose this portion, we actually debated on this portion because we didn't know if we wanted to include it because of many translations. The way that Stephen is quoting from the days of Exodus and Moses and the children of Israel in the wilderness for 40 years, then he skips right up to the days of Isaiah and Jeremiah right before they go into Babylonian exile.
And this is a specific quote he's pulling from.
Yes.
Is it Amos?
It's I believe it's from Amos. Let me look real quick. It is from 43. Yeah, it's Amos 5 is where he's pulling it from. But the idea is that, in the days of Amos, that they were about to go be invaded, right? And being deported and exiled and
into Babylon.
And about to be divorced from the land, not from the covenant, from the land. And so therefore, Stephen is actually mixing these ideas together to express disobedience over a large timeline. Okay, so I just hope people don't want to mix up the ideas, because the way many of these translations read, if you just do a quick reading of it, is you think Stephen is telling the wrong history. You think Stephen is telling us that they took up Molech and the star Remphan in the desert in the wilderness.
Right.
But we know from all the Torah that every time they tried to rebel in the wilderness, God dealt severely with them. That didn't last more than a day or more. I mean, it didn't last long. So what Stephen is referring to is the book of Amos. He's quoting directly from that, and that was when Israel had already been established in the land as a kingdom, and they had multiple kings and succession, and they had already been split up into two kingdoms because they couldn't, be peaceful with each other in their own land, and they had already stopped following the commandments and started serving other gods like Molech and Remphan. And so this is what he's talking about. But he's just, because he's expressing a history of disobedience, that's why he mixes the two together so quickly. Okay, so I just don't want to be confused. Verse 44, he says, our forefathers had the tabernacle of the testimony in the desert, just as he who spoke to Moses commanded him to make it according to the pattern he had seen. Our forefathers in turn received it, and with Joshua brought it in when they dispossessed the nations that God drove out before our fathers until the days of David. He found favor in God's sight and asked that he might provide a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built him a house. However, the Most High does not dwell in sanctuaries made with hands, as the prophet says. Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Oh wait, what did he say? There's a verse. There's a verse again in there's two mentions of the word heaven. What is that? What was the definition of heaven? It's a structure called the firmament. And what is Yahweh saying in verse 49? Heaven is my throne, the firmament is my throne. And earth is my footstool. Okay.
It's very different from, it's not a yoga ball sitting in front of his feet.
It's very different. Okay. He's referencing the structure. And the context, he follows it up with, and what sort of house would you build for me? Right. Because he's telling them, I already built a house. Yeah. It's called a firmament. It's back there. So what sort of house? It was back in Genesis. Right? So he's telling these people now, what sort of house are you going to build for me? The firmament's my throne. The earth is my footstool. So he's referencing the context of the analogy, of the comparison that he is, rhetorically asking them,
Right.
because he knows they don't have the power to make anything that can contain him, right? So he's referencing, I've already built a house. What kind of house are you gonna build for me? You know what I mean? And I think that's amazing when we understand these things in the context of the definitions provided for us by the Father.
Right.
So verse 50 says, "Did not my hand make all these things?" And then verse 51, he says, "You stiff-necked people with uncircumcised hearts and ears, you are always resisting the Holy Spirit. As your fathers did, so do you." That's interesting, because he's talking about the Holy Spirit being resisted in the days of Deuteronomy.
What?
What?
People had the Spirit before Acts? They could resist the Spirit before
we're being
that?
a little glib here, but I'm just, yes, guys, there is an abundance of evidence the Holy Spirit was moving around, doing things. It is what gives us the energy and desire to follow the commandments.
Right.
And when we're open to God and we search Him with our heart and soul, strength and mind, He provides the Spirit to us to follow out the commandments. This is kind of the deal, and that's why when you quench the Spirit, you're forgetting Him. You're ignoring the commandments. Right. You're putting out that fire of passion to go after these things, and you're falling back into disobedience and forgetfulness of the covenant. So anyway, and so verse 52, he says, "Which of the prophets did your father not persecute? They even killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become. You received the law under the direction of angels, and yet have not kept it." We got two more verses, or no, actually, that was the last verse. I'm sorry. So that was the last verse. Isn't that fascinating that he says in verse 52, "They even killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whose betrayers and murderers you have now become." Yeah. Because we see, Isaiah clearly, right? Jeremiah mentions him. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's think of another
Ezekiel.
one. Ezekiel definitely mentions the branch. Zechariah talks about it as well. So there's four just right there. They didn't kill King David, even though he prophesied about the coming one, righteous one, Psalm 16:10. But I think it's fascinating that we get people like Ezra, and he clearly talked about it.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Just like without. Now they didn't kill him though. But what I'm getting at is there were prophets that were constantly talking about the coming of the righteous one, even all the way back to Enoch.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating, because here he is standing in front of people that are denying Jesus, who had just walked around for 3.5 years and presented himself to them with great miracles, signs and wonders, rose from the dead. And he's talking to people that refuse to believe in Jesus, and he's saying, you also and your predecessors refused to believe the guys that talked about him coming, and you guys are here, and he came, and you don't even believe. You know what I'm saying? He's laying on thick. It's no wonder they stoned him. So, I mean, he's literally laying on thick to them, right? He doesn't mince words, and we even later at the end of this, he says he sees Son of Man standing, which is a term for judgment, at the right hand of the Father. So. He was definitely pushing their buttons. They were triggered at that moment.
Well, and that's a really interesting parallel that, as you and I read through these Torah portions and plan our studies, we constantly are saying to each other, how can these people witness all of these wonderful, glorious miracles and all these amazing things and still choose not to follow him, not to believe in him? How can they do that? And then here we have Stephen is pointing out the very same things. I mean, these people at this time who were denying Yeshua, they had witnessed all these miracles that Yeshua had done. He rose from the dead. He was around he didn't just leave. He was around for 40 days after that. They witnessed all these amazing works of the Lord, and their hearts were still uncircumcised. Their necks were still stiff.
That's right.
So, interesting parallels there.
It's heartbreaking, but it's definitely a strong parallel. Okay, so next we got our extra biblical book that we're going to include in our portion this week.
That's our little special spin on the Torah portion. We add the extra biblicals, a few of them that we're confident in. Yeah,
I mean there's quite a few out there, but there's a good handful that I've studied thoroughly. Yeah. I'm very confident that these not only have every single component of context and story narrative in common with what we see in the modern American canon of 66, but they just affirm what's already in the book. All right, so this one, and actually this particular book, Book of Jubilees, has been in the Ethiopian canon for a long time, almost 3,000 years. They've had it forever, and it's
It's
just
never taken out,
never
and
taken
put back
out.
in for them. It's
By the
been
way,
there
many
whole
people may
time.
not realize that many of the dominant majority of the people of Ethiopia of today are descendants from ancient Levites.
Yeah.
During the days of Solomon.
They're genetically Levites.
And during the Assyrian invasion, supposedly a lot of them retreated down to Ethiopia because during that time Ethiopia was actually the capital of Egypt.
Right.
That's where the Queen of Sheba came from,
Yeah.
right? So that was the capital of Egypt, and so there was trade relations, and there was a familiarity there. There was families back and forth there. It's probably no wonder that Mary and Joseph took Jesus down to Egypt.
Solomon built a temple down there, guys.
Well, that's maybe for a different. We don't want to give away the goods later, but the point is there's a lot.
Okay, stay tuned for that one.
There's a special.
Apparently, we're keeping that one, up our sleeves.
So there's a special work that I want to do, a special video I want to make about the Ethiopians and their time with the Old Testament and their ancient Levites, guys. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Now, in modern times, in the last 40 to 50, 100, maybe 100 years, there's been an intermixing of folks from other African nations into Ethiopia, and many of them are Muslim background in their religious belief. But as far as the dominant and ancestral people for the last 2,000 plus years, almost 3,000 years in Ethiopia, many of them are Levites.
Yep.
This is amazing. And here's the best part. They believe in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And
they're
guess
messianics.
What? They're messianics. Guess what? They're keeping the law down there.
Yeah.
They're keeping the feasts.
Yep.
They're doing all kinds of fun stuff. And they're having a good time, and they are in love with Yeshua.
Yeah.
And they're living, walking, breathing people who do it right in Deuteronomy.
They're witnesses. And
they're hidden away, and no one really knows about them, I don't think. So it's, anyway, well, apparently Mussolini knew about them. He tried to attack them before World War II.
There's some interesting history there.
Yeah, they've been tried to attack twice by
the country where Rome is.
Yeah, the country where the Vatican is.
Yeah.
Tried to attack them twice in 40 years. And try to invade them.
And they managed to fight them off.
It's pretty wild. Yeah. So there is a lot of fun history there. But more than anything, we have this whole concept that the Book of Jubilees has been in their canon, which they've considered Scripture, along with the Book of Enoch, and a lot of other books that we have in our American canon. They've had those for over 2 millennia.
Yeah.
Okay, and they 100% believe the Scripture. They follow its timeline for their festivals they keep. And they, they're in love with Jesus Christ. I mean, it's amazing. So
what did we pair this
we
week?
paired chapter 1. Okay.
Of Jubilees?
Chapter 1 of Jubilees, and I believe it's down to verse
1 through 9?
Just 1 through 9,
Yeah.
okay? And you or me? Do you want to read it?
I guess it's my turn.
Do you want to read it?
Get a little closer to me here.
Okay.
All right. And it came to pass in the first year of the exodus of the children of Israel out of Egypt, in the 3rd month, on the 16th day of the month, that God spoke to Moses, saying, Come up to me on the mount, and I will give thee 2 tablets of stone of the law, and of the commandment which I have written, that thou may teach them. And Moses went up into the mount of God, and the glory of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai, and a cloud overshadowed it 6 days. And he called to Moses on the 7th day out of the midst of the cloud, and the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a flaming fire on the top of the mount. And Moses was on the mount 40 days and 40 nights, and God taught him the earlier and the later history of the division of all the days of the law and of the testimony. And he said, Incline thine heart to every word which I shall speak to you on this mount, and write them in a book, in order that their generations may see how I have not forsaken them for all the evil which they have wrought, in transgressing the covenant which I established between me and you for their generations this day on Mount Sinai. And thus it will come to pass, when all these things come upon them, that they will recognize that I am more righteous than they in all their judgments and in all their actions, and they will recognize that I have been truly with them. And do you write for yourself all these words which I declare unto you this day, for I know their rebellion and their stiff neck before I bring them into the land of which I swore to their fathers, to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob, saying, Unto your seed will I give a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will eat and be satisfied, and they will turn to strange gods, to gods which cannot deliver them from their tribulation. And this witness shall be heard for a witness against them, for they will forget all my commandments, even all that I command them, and they will walk after the Gentiles, and after their uncleanness, and after their shame, and will serve their gods. And these will prove unto them an offense and a tribulation, and an affliction and a snare. And many will perish, and they will be taken captive, and will fall into the hands of the enemy, because they have forsaken my ordinances and my commandments, and the festivals of my covenant, and my Sabbaths, and my holy place which I have hallowed for myself in their midst, and my tabernacle and my sanctuary which I have hallowed for myself in the midst of the land, that I should set my name upon it, and that it should dwell there.
All right, wow. It's a lot of it's amazing, right?
Yeah, I love the book of Jubilees.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot there. This is, of course, Mount Sinai moment.
Right.
And he's telling them that they're stiff-necked still, right?
We're also seeing Moses was told a lot more while he was up there.
That's
He
right.
was, the history of the earlier and latter days was given to him.
That's right. So this is a little bit of that inclusion of what we talked about.
Yeah.
He was up there for 80 days.
Yeah.
A lot more was given to him than just the Ten Commandments. And that's why he understood how to make the things in the tabernacle, because he had seen them
Right.
in the heavenly tabernacle in a vision and was being explained how to make them to the exact details.
And, if we're to go from the narrative here, this book of Jubilees is something that was also given to him
That's right.
while he was up there. This
Yeah.
is something a lot of things, backstory of things is explained in the book of Jubilees
That's
that
right.
you just don't find in Genesis. Genesis will just mention things like we should know about them. If we had this book in our canon, we would know. There are things mentioned in Genesis. You're like, well, how did that happen?
That's right.
Where did that come from? Where did those people come from?
And who would have given this book to him? That's what we read in Acts chapter 7
Yeah.
just recently, where it says how he was on Mount Sinai with the angel.
Yeah.
And the angels were mediating the law to them. We also have that repeated to us in Hebrews chapter
Galatians,
2 and Galatians chapter
Hebrews.
3. So we have it in Acts 7 again. Stephen
Right.
even is talking about it, how there was angels on top of Mount Sinai given, and that is the narrative. That is the how this is written in the book of Jubilees. It's from the perspective of angels explaining the laws to him and explaining the history of the laws to him, as well as he's getting future prophecy about them becoming rebellious in the future and how they'll be kicked out of the land. And and we get further down in Jubilees chapter 1, we get the promise of Deuteronomy 30, where they're regathered at the first resurrection back into the land and the return of the Messiah and all this fun stuff. So book of Jubilees is a wonderful pairing. It's like, it's like a fine wine to the meat of the Torah, right?
True.
It's like I just sit here with my book of Jubilees and chew on my steak from the Torah, and I've got a wonderful meal. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So it's anyway. I just whatever. So I like eating up the word. That's me.
Yes. Yeah.
So
he likes his metaphors too.
Yeah. Sorry. So other than that, I think that we have probably completed this portion for week 3.
Yeah.
And I like this one, but I'm partial towards Deuteronomy and Jubilees and Book of Acts, so I guess I would. But but anyway, Sweetie, did you have any final words you'd like to share?
No, I just want to thank everyone who's joined us, and if you have any questions, comments, drop them below. You guys know how to find us on Facebook. If you have any suggestions, any way we could possibly improve things. I know we're working on how we do our slides and the translations we use and stuff like that. We're open to feedback. And again, I just want to encourage everybody that we can understand His Word in its entirety. And the way we can do that is by letting Him define His terms and being open to whatever those definitions may entail. And really, once you start to understand these core concepts, these contextual concepts, you will be able to preach the gospel of the kingdom to all creatures with ease, just like we're commanded to. It's not hard when you understand these things, and you'll always be ready with an answer, because people have questions because teaching has been so bad for so many generations, and people have valid questions and they have valid criticisms. When they point out hypocrisy in certain areas, they're not necessarily wrong. And that hypocrisy for some people might just be coming from ignorance and not, taking the time to read and not having good teachers. All that kind of stuff is involved. But I just really want to encourage everybody that it's not hard to understand these things when you have those core foundational concepts down. And it all starts in Genesis. It all starts with Him describing his creation and giving us the definition for all these things. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us and just encourage you to, keep up with the portions, read them throughout the week, listen to them on audio if that's easier for you. Or you can wait till we read them to you here on Shabbat, that's fine. But as long as you're, getting that weekly meal.
That's right. Make sure you eat every week.
Yeah, we just want to edify you guys, and we want you guys to be able to go and teach others. We want you to be able to go and explain these things to others, whether they're in a church or whether they're, at a college campus, screaming about safe places. I mean, we want you to really just universally be able to explain the gospel of the kingdom. So
I'll tell them about the eternal safe place where no harm will be done on its
the
mountain.
Real safe place.
Isaiah 9:11, no harm is going to be done in its holy mountain. So that's the promise of the wonderful safe place to come. Hey, thanks for joining us, everyone. This has been so much fun. Thank you, sweetie, for doing this with me.
Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff.
If you're new to the channel, we've got a ton of other videos. And like, share, and subscribe. Also tap the bell, that way you're notified when new videos come out. And we plan to be, putting up a new portion every week for you, okay? So thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Have a good week.